as our colleagues in Amsterdam were saying, this is a partnership between the Asfari Institute at the American University of Beirut, the Royal Tropical Institute in Amsterdam, and EthiXPERT in Johannesburg. The idea behind this is how do we build equitable knowledge partnership. And for us at the Asfari Institute, our mission is to create and nurture and sustain spaces for homegrown knowledge production, for knowledge production that is led by young, local, intersectional feminist scholars who are connected with social movements, with what is happening in our region. So I'm happy to welcome you all, and I would like to introduce our first three speakers. First of all, I want to welcome Sylvie Diepen, the Deputy Ambassador, the Dutch Deputy Ambassador. Thank you for being with us. And Claudine, also from the Dutch Embassy. Thank you both for being with us. Before I give the floor to Sylvie for her introductory remark, I also want to introduce our two keynote speakers. Dr. V. Badan from the psychology department, even though she says she hates psychology, but she's one of the wonderful emerging gender scholars, but also activists, and we're really proud and happy that you are with us, V. Our second keynote speaker is a feminist activist from Lebanon. She's also one of the first members of the Asfari Institute Senior Fellows. She will be with us, and the idea is that you listen to both our keynote speakers and the ways in which you can think as a knowledge producer, both from the perspective of a scholar, but also from a perspective of an activist on the ground. And I know that Dana is desperately looking for a place to park, but we will have her on time. I want to thank all of the Asfari Institute team. Really, it hasn't been easy we've been working on this for the last few months, and also the wonderful partnership with the Royal Tropical Institute in Amsterdam and our colleague at EthiXPERT. But also I want to thank particularly my colleague, my very young colleague and AUB alumni, Carla Ail, who's done a perfect job, a wonderful job in spearheading this event. Thank you. Thank you so much, Carla. Without further ado, Sylvie.
Thanks a lot. Will I be needing the microphone? Yeah, right. Oh, okay. Well, it's lovely to be here today, and if I look at you all, I think the power of knowledge is certainly feminine. So, no offense, gentlemen, but just just a short observation. So today is about the power of bridging knowledge, and I'm very happy to see the Asfari Institute and the Royal Tropical Institute mobilizing this discussion and engaging in a partnership between Lebanon and the Netherlands. These interventions are critical in a time when Lebanon's education system is threatened with collapse, and effective knowledge exchange could be one step towards redefining how education institutions in Lebanon can recover and grow. Today, the world of knowledge sees a divide between the South, the global South, and the global North, and creating space for knowledge exchange is the first step towards narrowing this divide. Benefiting from each other's knowledge communities, sharing experiences and resources, in short, broaden our horizons to different cultures and ways of working, will enable us better to tackle the global challenges that lie ahead, the mutual challenges that lie ahead. So strengthening these networks is core to the Netherlands International Cooperation Strategy. We apply an education ecosystem approach, focusing on capacity development of institutions and scholars alike through scholarships, research, and tailor-made training programs. We thus experience firsthand how knowledge acts as a global equalizer and enabler for integration. And I think this is what this is all about. So achieving inclusive societies relies first and foremost on realizing that most challenges are globally interrelated. Reducing existing knowledge asymmetry between the South and the North by promoting continuous exchange is the only path towards inclusive knowledge production. This demands a collective language across the education ecosystem that translates to the North and the South alike. Although it comes with many challenges, we continue to learn how to make the process practical and participatory. So today a critical global challenge is being addressed, and it's a great pleasure for me to take part in this event, or I should say for us, because Claudine will stay a bit longer, will be able to stay a bit longer today. And I'm eager to hear about different perspectives and approaches. And I wish us all a very successful series of events and a strong collaboration between the Asfari Institute and the Tropical Royal Institute, and great results. So thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Sylvie, and I can tell you that this collaboration with the Royal Tropical Institute came as a result, as a culmination of month and month and month of discussions over what does decolonizing knowledge actually mean, and how do we put it in practice. And I want to turn to Dr. V and invite her to take the floor. I think many are eager to hear what she has to say, including myself.
Thank you, Lina. And thank you for having me today. I'm not used to the microphone situation, and I use a clicker, so I'm sorry if my voice just travels differently than I expected it to. So thank you for the introduction, Lina. I am a faculty member at the Department of Psychology at AUB, and psychology as a science is one that is quite colonial in its nature, which is a big part of why I have my reservations towards what I practice and the kind of research that I do. So I try to do it a little differently. And my talk today will be on decolonizing knowledge towards indigenous knowledge systems. And I will be targeting specifically how we can decolonize academic knowledge. So for those of you who are non-academics in the room, I think you'll agree with a lot of the points that I'll try to make today, hopefully, but also the room is open for discussion afterwards if you have more practical strategies on how we can do academic knowledge production better. So I'll give you a bit of a roadmap of what my talk is going to look like. I'm first going to briefly go over the idea of coloniality of knowledge, and then I'll go to the specific problems with academic knowledge production. I'll ask a series of questions to examine those problems, and then I'll go towards some strategies that were developed within the field of psychology, but also the various social sciences towards decolonizing academic knowledge. I'll talk about three strategies specifically, which are indigenous resistance, accompaniment, and denaturalization, and I'll end with some, broad paths forward that we can explore further in the dialogue sessions that we will have after the speeches today. So I'll start with the big concept of the coloniality of knowledge, and I will quote one of my favorite thinkers of all time, Frantz Fanon, who's also a psychologist, a decolonial thinker, so I find a lot of inspiration in his work. He's from Martinique, which is a former French colony, so his work comes from lived experience, and he received his training in France too, so he was exposed to that coloniality of academic knowledge firsthand. And Fanon said, in the colonial context, the settler only ends his work of breaking in the native when the latter admits loudly and intelligibly the supremacy of the white man's value. In psychological terms, that's what Fanon called the internalization of inferiority, which is something that we have to examine within ourselves as local, native, or indigenous academics working on knowledge production all the time, because the systems that we work with, for the most part, are colonial systems of knowledge production. So knowledge, the coloniality of knowledge, but also the coloniality of being, were two ideas put forth by Fanon and future scholars as well. And they made the argument that modal patterns of colonizer societies are usually perceived as the pinnacle or as the epitome of human progress. That comes also with the thought that the physical sciences, social sciences, and global policy approaches that are put forth by colonial societies or colonizing societies are those that are ideal or the ones that we should, strive to fulfill. For example, Western medicine is hailed as the ultimate form of medicine as compared to traditional approaches to medicine. But even in the production of science in the social sciences, we value, and I'll discuss that a little later, we value a lot quantitative and experimental research over more, indigenous forms of knowledge production. And to reach decolonial liberation, we need to think about new ways of being and existing, about new concepts, epistemologies, and methodologies to conduct our research that are quite different from what we're used to and from what we're trained in. And to do that, we have to really draw very closely upon the experiences of people in context, people from colonized backgrounds, and what Fanon called decolonized subjects ourselves. So I'll move to the knowledge production problems that I'll be examining again through a series of questions. Some of my colleagues in the decolonial line of psychological thinking have proposed the following argument, which is that academic knowledge production reflects and promotes the interests of people from the global north, from Western, educated, industrialized, rich, and democratic settings. That's not the entire world. That's just a small part of the world. But the global north in general has perpetuated and imposed those systems of knowledge and being as the hegemonic standard of how we should generate knowledge, think about the world, and also exist in the world. So the next thing I'm going to do is unpack this argument through a series of questions that will kind of tap into why this makes a lot of sense, right? The first question is, who decides what knowledge is produced? Usually in academic knowledge production, but also outside of academia, we rely a lot on funders and donors to give us money to conduct our research because it's a lot of labor. Most of this money comes from the global north and from, Western donors. And of course, the donors do have their own agendas, so we're bound by the kind of knowledge we can produce because we have to fulfill that need that the donors are imposing for the most part. These agendas are very, very frequently more westernized and less so culturally sensitive. So you're kind of pushing against the tide here. And also, who sets those agendas in general? It's usually governments, policymakers, international organizations, big entities that have a say in how the world runs today. So in a lot of sense, most of the knowledge production is neo-colonial because it's imposed from the outside in. The second question is, where is most knowledge produced? Most knowledge is produced in elite institutions in the global north, mostly in the US and Western Europe. These are prestigious institutions, elite institutions, Ivy Leagues, for example. Most of knowledge is produced in research groups and labs that exist in those institutions and that are oftentimes headed by, people from European descent, oftentimes men, more so women these days, but also people who are white. I will tap into non-academic research or knowledge production very briefly based on my experience within international organizations, but international organizations also do produce a lot of knowledge. This knowledge, again, is governed by the agendas that are put forth by donors. And when local organizations try to push for producing locally engaged knowledge, they're also restrained by, their survival. You have to meet the metrics of your grants that you receive. You have to produce knowledge that speaks to what the donors want. So your knowledge production is still bound even when you're doing it locally. And who produces the knowledge? Who are the individuals who produce the knowledge? Usually they're very famous, big names, prominent scholars from the global north. They tend to be mostly cis men and more recently cis women who are from European descent. If you're doing your research outside of academic institutions, the research groups that come from organizations are usually headed by folks from outside the regions in which the research is being produced. So it comes from international organizations with various franchises around the globe. And the researchers usually who are heading or conceptualizing or thinking about the kind of knowledge that they want from that project also come from the outside in. And I think one of the most disappointing things is why is that knowledge produced, right? In the academic sphere, and for those of you academics, you probably know what this feels like. I personally trained in the US, so I have firsthand experience of this idea of publish or perish. A lot of times we are publishing popcorn research just so we can get our resume filled up with publications in good journals, so we can get, you know, the next tenure track job, so we can get the next grant. So we're really just publishing for individual career advancement. That beats the purpose of producing knowledge that is meaningful in many ways. And we need to be published, we need to produce knowledge in order to get grants, and these grants would further our careers. Folks here from organizations know that also. You probably have to publish a lot of knowledge, a lot of reports as well in order to meet the funders' needs, get future grants, and, you know, survive. So in the greater scheme of things, sometimes we have to do things for either our own individual personal advancement or the survival of our organization. Which means that the knowledge that is going to be produced may be a little less meaningful or transformative than what we need it to be. And finally, the last question I ask around this is, which knowledge is more valued? And here I will focus on my discipline and I will focus on the social sciences. Colonial systems of knowledge within the social sciences are usually the most valued. We emphasize the need for empirical, quantitative, experimental research over indigenous modes of production, such as oral histories, which we know very prominently in our region are a way of transmitting knowledge from generation to generation. Oral histories are usually frowned upon in many of the social sciences. Also, qualitative methodologies such as indigenous and grounded theory research are also discounted because they're not perceived to be as rigorous as quantitative methods. And quantitative methods are hegemonically westernized ways of thinking and approaching research questions. And also, this one is very personal because, you know, even when we're setting up our syllabi for our classes, we try to go for articles or to give our students readings that are published in top-tier journals, or what we call Q1 journals in the ranking system. This ranking system discounts, A, any knowledge produced by, you know, in non-English journals for the most part. It discounts knowledge that's produced outside the peer-reviewed realm. And also there's a hegemony in terms of which publishing houses produce those top-tier journals. So there's also this idea that the metrics around which journals produce good knowledge that are colonial in nature. So now hopefully the idea of why we believe that there's a coloniality in knowledge production is clearer. I'll get to the component of how we can decolonize knowledge production. A lot of what I'll discuss is more theoretical and of course is open to more practical strategies in the dialogue sessions that we'll hold after the talks today. Usually, the aims of decolonizing knowledge are twofold. First, there's a critical aim of us doing like we're doing today, opening up knowledge production, critically examining how it's being done, critiquing the Western modes of knowledge production, and showing how much violence is inherent to adopting knowledge systems that are not attuned to where they're being applied. But also, we need to engage as local academics in self-critique as well. We, as Fanon called us, are colonial subjects, and colonial subjects internalize inferiority. We do believe that maybe the hegemonic systems of knowledge production are the best systems of knowledge production, and we might, you know, continue doing our work as such. I'm personally complicit in this, so I'm not, you know, outside of this realm of self-critique. So we need to engage in the self-critique as well. But also, decolonial approaches have a reconstructive approach, so it's not just about critique. It's about thinking how we can reconstruct knowledge production systems in ways that could be conducive for indigenous knowledge, locally grounded knowledge, and knowledge that is really context-specific. So hopefully I'll try to establish that with a few strategies that emerged from the field of decolonial psychology. That's what I have to reflect on because that's my discipline, but I do think again that it applies to a lot of the social sciences. So within decolonial psychology, we've thought about 3 different approaches to decolonizing knowledge: indigenous resistance, accompaniment, and denaturalization. And I'll discuss each one of them and the limitations of each very briefly. In indigenous resistance, which I think is the most important way forward with decolonizing knowledge, we are centering the voice, the experiences of local indigenous actors. We are engaging as indigenous and local researchers in that knowledge production. But we're also trying to use methods that are quite different from what we're disciplinarily trained to do. So here we might engage in less typically used methods of research, such as oral histories, because they're more culturally grounded and culturally sensitive. When we're engaging in indigenous resistance, we're producing knowledge that reflects local experiences and local realities, and that hopefully, because they're so locally rooted and grounded, they would in turn lead to some kind of outcome that would service the community that we are conducting our research in. And I think this is a huge gap in academic research, is we use communities to conduct research. We produce information about those communities, and then we circulate and disseminate the information in academic conferences with no one from the people who are our main stakeholders there and present. So there's this lack of translation of knowledge. There's a lack of, giving back the way we should, because that's our, I think, moral and ethical responsibility as researchers when we're, exploiting a certain community. That the least we could do is, generate knowledge that services that community. But of course, there are limitations to this idea of indigenous resistance, and the biggest limitation is romantic conservatism. By romantic conservatism, I mean the cultural conservatism that comes from other ways of existence or other ways of being. So for example, let's take the Arab world as one case in point. If we are to do research on queer mobilization here, we can get some backlash that queer mobilization, is a Western phenomenon. It's not culturally appropriate. It's not relevant for us. And the other very big disadvantage that comes with this romantic conservatism is apologists for harmful practices that are deemed, culturally relevant. The biggest example from our region is female genital mutilation, for instance, which is, a very harmful practice that oftentimes is perceived as, as an impenetrable wall because it's a cultural practice. The second strategy is accompaniment, and for a lot of you here who are cultural researchers and who do travel to your sites to conduct research, that's usually what this kind of approach entails. It entails researchers from more privileged institutions in the global north stepping away from their ivory tower and going into the field and conducting their research with the people on the ground with the aim of advancing social justice. Now, these researchers could be people from the region, but who practice in or conduct their research in more elite academic institutions, but it could also be people from outside the region who are really invested and interested in conducting meaningful and practical research. So the emphasis in this strategy is on place-based methods and generating knowledge that is place-based. So if you want to, examine feminist collective action in Lebanon, you have to be in Lebanon. You have to attend feminist protests. You have to go to feminist organizing circles to be able to understand that knowledge, rather than, be in Harvard and write about it and just do that from a distance. And the nice thing about this approach is that it demands the actual on-the-ground involvement of researchers from more privileged institutions. But with that comes many disadvantages, and I'm sure many of you are already thinking about this. What about epistemic extractivism? What about the researchers who treat the site just as a data collection site, where they come in, you know, live in the community for a year, 2 years, get the information they need, travel back to their bubble in the ivory tower, and do that, you know, write that research up, publish it in a top-tier journal, and then spread it in academic conferences without circling back to the communities that they're supposed to serve while doing this research. So in and of itself, this is a colonial practice of knowledge production. But there's also another disadvantage, which is what some colleagues have coined the white savior industrial complex, which means that, you know, you get researchers from the West who think benevolently that they will go to these, you know, places where a lot of social inequality exists, where a lot of injustice is rampant, and they have the tools necessary to bring in for the local communities for them to be able to do their job. Knowing that the local communities have their means of fighting social injustice, right? We do not need the benevolent outsider to come teach us how to do things. They can come observe, they can come learn, but that often happens in practice where folks come in and tell us what we need to do. And the final method of decolonizing knowledge production is denaturalization. And this is more theoretical in a sense that most of our decolonial conversations focus a lot on the harm that is done by colonialism, by the coloniality of knowledge, and how that impacts the colonized, right? So we focus a lot on the impact, but we don't really focus on the modes of production themselves. So with denaturalization, we are looking at the modes of academic knowledge production. We are calling them out for being, you know, white supremacist or racist or anti-feminist or conservative. For example, in psychology, most of our practices are quite conservative in terms of research. We need to critically examine the naturalness of Western hegemonic knowledge systems and then advocate for considering indigenous ways of knowledge production as also natural, as something that can be practiced and will generate meaningful knowledge. Now, the limitations of this, and I've experienced this firsthand, is the audience of this approach is us, some of us, the people producing this hegemonic knowledge, right? So it might end up just being this sanitized intellectual conversation about what we should and we should not do. And it would never leave the walls of a conference room, never become practical, but only becomes theoretical, only becomes tanzir, basically. So that's the biggest pitfall of this strategy. So to conclude, I personally, as a scholar and as an academic, and I do love academic research, but I like research that is more applied, I try to conceptualize some paths forward, and I'm happy to discuss those further in our dialogue session. First, we all need to acknowledge the epistemic violence that's perpetuated by the coloniality of knowledge. And even us as indigenous folks or native folks or local folks, we need to think about the role that we play in perpetuating that hegemony of knowledge. I think the prime method of decolonial approaches to knowledge production is indigenous resistance. So we should, as much as possible, engage in indigenous knowledge production and knowledge making. And of course, with these conversations, we can start to disrupt mainstream models of knowledge production, but we can do more. As academics, we should think about the value of, for example, publishing a piece in our mother tongue in an outlet that's not a peer-reviewed journal, and that will count as nothing towards our tenure applications, right? We should think about collaborating with civil society actors and activists and producing knowledge with them on the ground. Knowledge that will not advance our careers, but will be meaningful for what we care about and what we care to do on the ground. And with that, I think my rant is over. If you have any questions, that's my email. Happy to talk about this and think about this with you all. And thank you for listening.
Wow, what a good way to start. Thank you. I think, Dr. V, that day when you decided to come back to AUB was a very good day. So thank you so much. I think this sets us up on a very powerful note, and you're staying with us for the rest of the for the rest of the day. Thank you. And I want to move to, it's actually a natural move now, a very smooth move, to our senior fellow, Dana Ash. Dana, if I may say, is a trailblazer. What she has done, even at a very, especially at a very young age, I would say, in creating even the idea of what a safe space mean, in shaping what kind of knowledge is actually relevant, as Vi was saying. I'm really proud to have you with us, Dana. So please share your thoughts, your comments. And I know you're nervous, it's okay. Ça va?
Test. I feel like I should have memorized it now a little bit. First of all, thank you everyone for being here. Thank you, Lina. I'm not going to start off with introductions because I wrote it into this speech. I was told yesterday that I need to introduce a lot of myself because I usually kind of skip that and just say I'm the director of Haven. But there are a lot of things that I've done over the years that I should be at least a little bit proud of, even if my imposter syndrome tells me to forget all about it. So, hello, thank you all for joining us and for having me. I'm very humbled to be before you today. My name is Dana Ash, and I am the Executive Director of Haven for Artists. I'm also a cultural activist, playwright, and writer. Haven for Artists is a non-profit feminist organization, cultural organization, that works at the intersection of art and activism, unapologetically campaigning for women and LGBTQI rights in Lebanon and in the MENA region. I'm an intersectional feminism advocacy fellow in the Asfari Institute for Civil Society and Citizenship and serve on the Artist Changemaker Advisory Council for the Global Fund for Women. I am also a She Decides champion, basically fighting for the rights of bodily autonomy and reproductive rights internationally. I am also a cultural delegate for the Edinburgh Festival's Cultural Diplomacy Program. I'm going to start right in. I was fortunate, and to say privileged would be an understatement, to have met someone like Lina Abu Habib through a previous Haven team member back in 2018. Lina showed me genuine love and removed barriers for me to pass through. She opened and shared spaces with me, books, knowledge that I otherwise couldn't access. She gave freely, openly, and with no reservation. I currently have, an American University of Beirut identification card as a high school dropout. So Lina is a good example. So Lina is a good example of the power and knowledge when shared, in spaces when shared. The connections and the bridges that are built with kindness and open source knowledge, they signal in direct action. Whether that is professional or personal, it is based and rooted in principles. Not many of us are able, nor are afforded the same privileges, access, and spaces as others, and it's to no fault of our own, but the fault of those that have built those gates that have made us scale now. Those same gates that we must actively work towards tearing down. Haven for Artists was founded on that very same principle. Share the stage, share the resources, share the knowledge, art, culture, and share the audience. Initially starting as a pop-up platform for artists to showcase their work and to meet and to build bonds, it slowly grew and remolded itself into whatever the community wanted and whatever the community needed at that time. When we first started, our slogan was for the arts and by the arts. Slowly and surely, it became collaboration and not competition. It was an idea that many people watered. It wasn't mine. It was nourished, it was given time, and it was instilled with love. Haven could never belong to any one person completely, as pieces of it lie with every person that made it ever growing, made it into what it is and what it is becoming. 11 years later, it continues as such. by reflecting on every interaction, building on every connection, and attempting to include what we believe in everything that we do. We've opened 3 community centers so far as a community. The first 2 without any funding at all. It's pertinent to say that the houses did not stop regular visual exhibitions and festivals and concerts and getting together and conversations, as well as advocacy campaigns. Artists lived, ate, slept as they built the first Haven House. We lived in its sawdust, in its dirt, in its broken walls, its ripped off wallpaper, its dried glue. The first Haven House served primarily as an art hub, a space where artists were supported and encouraged by an interdependent community. We had 2 artists in residence at a time, along with hosting workshops and talks and screenings, a free workspace, spoken word events, listening sessions, all for free, all accessible, all without funding. From 2015 till 2017, the first Haven House hosted 96 events, while the collective hosted 2 large festivals, one in the forest in Baysur and one in the center of Beirut. Concept 2092 is Haven's second creative hub. This was a reaction to the need to expand particular services that a larger space was required to fulfill. Haven acted as a shelter for LGBTQI individuals and the artist residency program, as well as used the space to host cultural, civil, and social initiatives through open discussions, civic engagement, campaigns, and collaborations with local organizations and activists in the field. From 2017 till 2019, the second Haven House hosted 124 free and accessible events, while the collective itself hosted 2 international exhibitions and a local exhibition, Vices and Validation, which included the participation of 38 artists that identified as women. In 2020, with COVID placing us in isolation, Haven produced a film entitled Courage, which tackled identity, freedom, and queer being in the Middle East, and particularly in Lebanon. The dominating discourse being that one promotes coming out of the closet as an act of courage, as a desired goal, to the exclusion of those who, through a courageous act themselves, do not come out. Courage engages with what it means to live a queer existence in the Middle East and how we define our own realities. Following the August 4th Beirut blast, and although a cultural organization, we are community members first. Our organization remolded itself and turned its offices into a shelter. We became a center for distributing aid and relief. In total, we were able to crowdfund $103,000, and we distributed directly in cash and rent assistance. The current and the third Haven House, with its beautiful garden, opened in February 2022. The community can organize and produce interventions varying from social to cultural events while utilizing the many tools and resources available in the center, with the Haven team itself acting as a support mechanism. Haven employs a feminist economy and anti-gatekeeping policy. Everything we produce, we teach. Everything we think, we give a workshop on. Our aim is for that in of itself to not only share the knowledge that we've gained and the know-how we've accumulated, but also the means to complete it. Also the means to support those that wish to do it better. Again, more. Another way that we try to put that into action is that we cover the fees of facilitators from the community. From workshops to talks to drag shows, we support them so that they could support their community members for free. In turn, it means that the entire community is engaged, involved, and has a say in what they get out of the space and what they demand of the organization. The center also acts as a platform and incubator for grassroots organizations and collectives, providing tailored support in needed areas, most often capacity building, policies, fundraising, campaigns, visual design, creative direction. Grassroots organizations and feminist collectives use the Haven House to implement activities or just to meet with potential partners and activists. Whatever skills, tools, or information we gained in the last 11 years belong to our community. Nothing belonged to the organization. The Haven House is now open every Monday through Saturday from 10 a.m. to 7 p.m. And I'm going to play a little video of that, and then I'll go into something else. Also, if I'm reading too quickly, please tell me. I'm quite nervous. Yeah. was supposed to stop it before the logos because they don't want me to say I'm tipsy. So as you can tell, Haven is built on community. It's built on relaying and leaning on one another, learning from each other. It's meant to be sharing joy and sharing healing, sharing devotion, sharing art, sharing culture, sharing oral history. And hopefully being able to expand on the knowledge, being able to build on that together, and being able to reclaim the narrative from those colonial powers that told us that queerness was a Western concept, when in fact, it was very much ours before the colonizers came. Our histories are very well known in how diverse we were, how queerness was very much embedded in what we were, and how powerful our matriarchs were, and then suddenly, that part of our history was erased. So our job, our generation, our activists, the youth, now they're in a position of not just reclaiming the narrative, because it was never theirs to take in the first place, but it was instilling the reality into how we behave, how we act, how we think, how we persuade, and how we pursue everything that we are. I grew from the abundance of wealth shared with me by the incredible feminists and artists that I met throughout the years, many of which have become friends, mentors, partners, people that shared their truth and enabled me to find my own in theirs. The willingness to grow with one another and to learn from each other taught me the power of knowledge when shared, and frankly, the power of sharing. I was taught the meaning of community by practicing it with community. And I'm still learning. I'm still learning the responsibilities of the individual in taking care of that community, of taking care of that knowledge, taking care of that resources, and then making sure the buck doesn't stop with you. The conversation can never be concluded, and our doors to different methods and modes can never be closed. Our responsibilities are the equal dissemination of information, the equitable access to resource and support systems, and the empowerment of those around us through direct action. Not a pat on the back, not a discussion we have in a fleeting moment and never bring up again, but in direct action. In my youth, I had to accept only crumbs of information. One way I did that was attending classes with friends in universities that I couldn't afford. I built stages in LAU when I couldn't study theater, and although I couldn't attend the theory classes, those crumbs were enough for me to teach myself carpentry. That skill itself helped build some of the furniture needed to open each and every single one of the Haven houses. Nonetheless, the term imposter is hard to shake. It could be the degree, it could be the finances, the home, the family life, but what shook me as I became more involved in activism was how much the circles I thought I resembled were harder to access than others. The more radical I became in my feminism and activism, the more I dared to ask for what I wasn't given, for what I wasn't afforded, as if it was a birthright. The more I experienced gatekeeping growing up, the more I understood the diverse ways in which gatekeeping manifests. It's not just institutions and organizations, it's also activists and friends. Like you said, it's that advancement of one particular person's career at the expense of all of those that made that career possible. We have all been raised, conditioned, and berated by white heteropatriarchy and capitalism. The weapons that maintain hierarchy and power, that make up and malign our sense of self and our sense of validation. All of us have been taught and trained to strive for the individual's success, to take and to keep taking for one's own self-preservation. So how do we counter the exclusion of so many of us from public spheres, from access to education? How do we share the wealth of knowledge and the abundance of experience? How do we overcome the rising restrictions on bodily autonomy and the violence inflicted on those who resist? How can you come together to respond to climate crisis? What tools already exist? What knowledge has been erased, and how can we unlearn to relearn so that we may one day heal and grow? Our connection and collaboration is a powerful and frightening confrontation to those that hold power, wealth, and withhold land. Oppression is rooted in hate, greed, and segregation. So it is only normal to believe that the greatest tool against it would be the radical polar opposite: love, generosity, horizontality. Where I stand today with agency, empowered, a little anxious, but still empowered, in this moment is on a path weaved by those that taught me, by those that shared with me, those that helped me, held me, and saved me. Those are the people that make you, and therefore they're the community that make you exist as a whole. You can't take parts of yourself and leave the rest. We say in Arabic, no, كبوا بالبحر. The best thing about it is you can't do that with community, right? They go with you. They're parts of you. They are intrinsically connected to your being, to your thoughts, to your emotions, and then you start wondering, is it just me, or is my understanding of life expanding? And the only reason it can expand is because it's not just your life. It's your community. And everything you do is a part of that action towards the community. And that community could be your neighbor, it could be the queer community, it could be feminists, it could be your cousin, it could be whoever you feel that you can directly, I don't want to say support, but share with, love and grow with, and then slowly those doors open up onto other communities, expanding beyond what you thought was your understanding of the world or your understanding of your circle. So those acts of sharing as I grew up, when I didn't know that I could even learn those things, when I thought that I wasn't allowed to because of my background, because of where I came from, because of my class or all of that, when I started realizing that those were mine as well, that was a very powerful tool to feel like I mattered enough to continue. It was, and the only reason we could continue is to see that that validation doesn't come from these hetero-white patriarchal capitalistic modes of validation. They come from one another. The networks of support sprout from the belief that kindness is an act, and a consistent act, one that is limitless in its form and a bountiful source that time and time again has mended, expanded, inspired, and embraced.
See why I said she was a trailblazer? We're honored to have you with us. Thank you ever so much. And I think this was such a powerful way to kick off this event. Vi and Dana, thank you ever so much. I think I'm really grateful for how you framed the conversation. Thank you. I don't know what to say more. I'm going to turn over to my wonderful, wonderful young colleague. I don't know why I have to keep mentioning that you're young, but my wonderful young colleague to take us through the rest of the day. Thank you.
Thank you so much. I really hope you've been having a good time, and now it's time for our coffee break. The coffee is out there, and I look forward to meeting all of you there. How long? It's for an hour.